Breakfast. As I'm sure you all know, Fidelity has a significant presence here in the Ocean State, the corporate campus in nearby Smithfield. Fidelity is a longtime active and very engaged member of the New England Council, and we are grateful for their ongoing support for the New England Council. In particular, we're very pleased to be joined this morning by Jim Febio, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Federal Government Relations, but also is the co-chair of the Financial Service Committee of the New England Council and a board member. And we're very fortunate to have his presence, his expertise, his wise counsel. And one of the reasons why the council is as good as we are is Jim's fingerprints are all over our agenda in the financial service. How am I doing? I can't read your notes. How am I doing here, Jim? And I just want to thank Jim and Fidelity. 2024 has gotten off to a great start for the New England Council. We have a very busy calendar planned in the weeks ahead. Next week, we'll hear from another member of the Region Senate delegation. That's the Maine Senator Angus King, at a breakfast in Washington, D.C. Here in New England, we're looking forward to events coming weeks with Mayor Michelle Wu in Boston, Governor Chris Sununu in New Hampshire, and last, but most certainly not least, 2024 Washington Leaders Conference will take place in Washington on May 15th and 16th. Registration is open. Sponsorship opportunities are available. We hope that many of you will join us for what we promise to be a very, very exciting 2 days in our nation's capital. I might add that our guest speaker here today, 100% attendance in all the years that I've been involved in the New England Council. Boy, are we lucky to have him at our event each and every year. And speaking of our guest speaker, not to take anything away, but I'm told that he's going to receive a very prestigious award in April at the Pell Center at Salve Regina University, a very distinguished honor that's only been given out 1 or 2 times previously, so truly a national, international recognition, and needless to say, well-deserved. If anything, long overdue, but that's just me. But what an honor it is for him. Speaking of honors, I just want to also acknowledge that General Jack Hammond, who runs the home base here in New England, will be a New Englander of the Year this year, the New England Council. And many of you who may not be aware of what Home Base is, it's an extraordinary organization. It's affiliated with Massachusetts General Hospital, the Boston Red Sox, that really their mission is to take care of the wounded in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, they served us, and now it's time for us to serve them and their families. It's an extraordinary program, absolutely extraordinary, that is nationally recognized. They're in Florida, they're in Arizona. Other states are calling them to say, we want to do what you're doing. But they are taking soldiers, male, female, from all parts of the United States and try to give them comfort and extraordinary service that they provide. So with that, to introduce the Senator, I'm very pleased to hand it over to Jim Febio.
Thanks, Jim, and it's great to be with everyone here at the New England Council this morning. What a great way to start the week. On behalf of Fidelity, I want to also acknowledge my good friend and colleague Rick Metters, who runs our regional public affairs here in Rhode Island, and our 4,600 associates who live and work in this great state. We're delighted to sponsor this morning's breakfast. It's a privilege to have a chance to introduce you, Senator Reid, our distinguished guest. We've been in Rhode Island almost as long as Jack Reed's been in the United States Senate. So we're about 27 years, give or take. And so coincidence, maybe. Now this might be the smallest state in the union, but it plays an outsized role in serving our nation. And much of that can really be attributed to the influence and seniority of Senator Reid on so many of the most sought-after committees in Washington. I mean, if you think about armed services, appropriations, bringing home the bacon for Rhode Island and the great infrastructure and works here. The banking committee, given the footprint of the financial services sector. And previously on the healthcare and pension committees. And So I think that positions him really well to deliver for the sectors that are represented in the room today across a wide spectrum of industries, whether that be healthcare, education, defense, manufacturing, and from where I sit, financial services. And I just wanted to take a minute to highlight the thoughtfulness and foresight of Senator Reid and how he approaches legislating. And I'm thinking back to having lived through the financial crisis, and we're in the Dodd-Frank negotiations and the response of the taxpayer-funded bailouts back in the day. And it was Senator Reid's leadership who stepped in, if I recall correctly, to make sure taxpayers reap the benefits of some of their involuntary investments in the sector on the returns from those investments. It was Senator Reid who had the foresight and thought to think, to manage risk in the system, we need better data and reporting, and thought that and then created the Office of Financial Research. It was Senator Reid who, looking out for America's consumers, was a strong advocate and supporter of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so I think back, 15 years ago to that period, and I can't believe, A, it's been that long, but B, think about how those initiatives are serving us today, because I know the regulators in Washington are relying on the OFR, as we've come to call it. We've seen the CFPB in action and been able to have a robust debate about the right level of consumer protection. Now, while Rhode Island offers Senator Reid a perch to look out for more than 300 million Americans, on the Fidelity side, it's been a place where we have a significant workforce serving more than 50 million Americans. Fidelity touches more than 1 in 5 households, helping them meet their lifetime financial needs, whether that be saving for retirement, education, healthcare, and helping employers in key areas to help with emergency savings and student debt. We know the student debt problem facing the nation. So we're pleased to be able to do a lion's share of that work from Rhode Island and with our workforce here. And Smithfield, Rhode Island's been a tremendous home away from home for Fidelity Investments. And we're grateful that it's combined with representation in Washington that is always well-informed, thoughtful, and engaged. And so, Senator Reid, I want to thank you for your service to our state, to the region of New England, and to the nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. That was a very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. And I also want to recognize Jim Brett. And Jim knows this, but I like Jim Brett. Nice guy. But I like his brother Harry and his niece Margaret much better. So I want them to know that. So, but Jim has been a great, great leader for the New England Council. Thank you. Also want to salute, literally, General Jack Hammond. I have visited his organization, and they do remarkable work, and they have plans to do even more work that's going to help all of our military personnel to operate better, and more importantly, when they leave the service or while they're still active, to anticipate problems that might be coming forward. So there's a really thoughtful gentleman who deserves to be the New England Person of the Year. So thanks, Jack. Now, when Jim was talking about the good old days of the Dodd-Frank Act, and I was saying, boy, I wish Washington was like that today. But it's a very complicated situation. And I think you see it every day. There's a profound lack of functionality in the House of Representatives. I've served there for 6 years. And what happened was, when McCarthy was striving to be Speaker, he made concessions that weakened the power of the Speaker dramatically. One is to allow any person to basically put his speakership at rest by declaring a vacancy, and then they have to vote on it. And the second is packing the Rules Committee with people who don't even agree with the Speaker. And as a result, this has been very difficult. There's only one thing worse than a too powerful speaker. It's too weak a speaker, and that's what we have. And it's not a reflection individually on Speaker Johnson. It's just the situation he finds himself. So on the other side, on the Senate side, we have our own group of desperados, but I was searching for a term that would not get me indicted. But we also have, surprisingly, I think, in a way, some very stable leadership from Senator McConnell, who's announced his retirement. We passed last year all 12 of our appropriation subcommittee bills, mostly unanimously, and we're ready to bring to the floor. We have two tremendously talented, and this is not coincidental, women who run our committee. That's Patty Murray from Washington State and our own Susan Collins from Maine. Wonderful, both wonderful people. And they pull together both sides. And then, of course, we passed the supplemental appropriation for Ukraine with over 70 votes, led in large part by Senator McConnell on our side and Senator Schumer. And what we find, though, is that the House is just unpredictable. They have a difficult time getting their act together. So I'm going to give you a little update of where we are, and then let's get into questions, because that's more informative. We've been passing these short time extensions, the continuing resolutions they're called, which means everybody spends at the same level you spent last year. Well, it is a horrendous way to do business, particularly for the Department of Defense, because their needs change, everything changes. But at least it keeps the government open. We thought we're ready, set to go, and we had some perturbations last week about the appropriations. The first tranche, we have two tranches. One is going to have to be enacted this Friday, and then the other one, I believe, the following Friday. In this first tranche of bills, we had agriculture FDA, commerce, justice, and science, energy and water, interior, EPA, military construction, VA, and transportation HUD. So we were moving forward, but I was actually sitting down at the slice of heaven, and having a cup of coffee when Senator Schumer called me, and in his very gentle New York accent, and with the vocabulary of a New Yorker, told me I better get off and start working on this, just because we've got a great problem. So we battled through. I think we resolved the problem. So it looks like this week we will actually get to do these bills. That means we'll have the budget in place for these 6, or more than that, but multiple agencies of the federal government. Now, the next tranche is following, we were hoping the following Friday, and that would be Defense, Financial Services, Homeland Security, Labor, HHS, Legislative Branch. I chair that, the least controversial one, and State and Foreign Operations. Now, we've got to get this done. First of all, as I said, CRs are just terrible. We waste more money than we ever save. But under the deal that Speaker McCarthy cut with the Congress, if we do not pass all 12 appropriations bills by April 30th, there can be no more continuing resolutions after that unless we go into sequestration, which is basically across-the-board cuts to every agency, which makes no sense whatsoever. If we continue to stumble along, we're going to be in a very, very precarious position. So that's where we are. I think we're moving slowly towards our goal of avoiding the worst. But in the background is the supplemental for Ukraine. And that's critical. I was there about 10 days ago. It's my second trip. We went from Zuzo. I don't know, anyone speak Polish here? But first of all, you have to get rid of several consonants that have no meaning in the word. Then you guess what the rest of the word means. But Zuzau. And we went in from Zuzal, we drove to Lviv, we met President Zelensky, we met his new defense minister. They are hanging on. They will never give up. These people are incredibly committed to the fight. But they're literally running out of ammunition. And the Russians are, it took them a while, but they're getting much better in terms of their electronic warfare operations, and probably more decisively is they're not a very good maneuver force. They don't have as skilled officers as we do, or non-commissioned officers. But when you're dug in with bunkers and minefields, and you don't have to be that talented to just keep shooting your weapon as fast as you can. So what we've seen is Russians beginning to not only stabilize the line, but beginning to go after places like Kiva, and my Ukrainian is bad also. But the situation is perilous. We've got to get them the money. It would also provide assistance to Israel, and importantly, humanitarian assistance for both Gaza and Ukraine, and we need that humanitarian assistance vitally. So the irony, of course, is that if this bill came to the floor in the House, it would pass, perhaps 2/3. But the problem is the Speaker is under great pressure from the Freedom Caucus and from Trump not to do this, etc. And here's a guy that's living day to day. Is somebody to come down tomorrow and file a petition that I'm fired or not? So he's trying to do that, but in the meantime, we are really in a perilous situation when it comes to Ukraine. The simple fact is, in my view, is Putin is not going to stop at the Ukraine. He has desires, obviously, on Moldova and other territory, but particularly the Baltic states. And the Baltic states are part of NATO. And Poland is also part of NATO. And any attack against a NATO country is attack against all, including the United States. So under Article 5, we would be compelled to enter the fray with our own soldiers. And I don't know about you, I'd rather send resources than young Americans, and that's my position. So we're trying to get these resources over there as fast as possible. So I'll stop there, take your questions later. Financial services and the economy. This is one of the most interesting economies I've been seeing in a while in my public service. GDP grew last year 3.1%. We're probably the strongest economy in the world right now. China has terrible problems. The Europeans are muddling along, et cetera. But we had a robust record. Our unemployment rate is below 4% for 24 straight months. We've never done that in the last 50 years. So people are working. In fact, as I look around here, probably your number one challenge is how do I get skilled workers and keep them? Well, we've got a robust economy. We added 3.1 million jobs last year. And we're doing things in the Senate and the House that I think will be helpful. One of the remarkable pieces, the only remarkable piece of legislation that came out of the House this year, is they actually passed a tax bill that had very good business provisions, giving small business particularly access to R&D tax credits in a way that they can use, and also putting back in place the family tax credit. The family tax credit was put in place during the pandemic. It resulted in bringing up about 40% of children in poverty out of poverty. And these are working parents who get a refund. They can use the money the way they want to. It's not some specialized program, et cetera. And it worked remarkably well, very efficient. The House passed that, much to our surprise but elation. We're trying to pass it in the Senate now, but we're getting the same kind of pushback, election year pushback of don't give Biden anything, and that's a problem. We're also seeing something that I think augurs well for the long term: increased productivity. It grew nearly by 3% last year, and that is probably the dynamic that is the most important thing to guarantee not only an expanding economy, but also increased wages and salaries for everyone. Because if you're more productive, you build more, you sell more, and you also are able to divide the profits among both the leadership and workers. So I think that's something good also. Now, those are bright spots in the economy. One spot that is not bright any place in the country, and particularly Rhode Island, is housing. You know, I don't have to tell you, the median price is up 75% over the past 5 years. There's no construction, basically. We're the last in the country for our housing permits. We haven't been building for the last 20 years. And I've been working on this issue since I literally got there. One of the things I did years ago in 2007, 8, whatever, was create the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That was a entity that we took the profits, or part of the profits, of the federal agencies, the Fannie Mae's and the Freddie Mac's, put them in and just use it for affordable housing. Grants, we've used a lot of them in Rhode Island. But we need much, much more money in that organization. We have the mechanism, but we don't have the resources. And so that's one of the things we're building on. I've got legislation in multiple ways. We have legislation that would build affordable housing, roughly $50 billion, which it would be paid for, so it's not deficit increasing, and it would go through these mechanisms, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, local housing agencies, etc. But this is a real problem, and it's not a problem that some people say, oh yeah, well, you know, those poor people who don't work, yeah. No. I'll give you a practical example. The good news, NOAA has announced that they are moving their Atlantic Ocean headquarters to Newport, Rhode Island. That is 200 to 300 jobs. Where do they live? We've got a couple of years to figure that out. Now, these folks are pretty fortunate because you're talking about engineers, technicians, so they're not making minimum wage. But, you know, just how can you absorb that? And they're coming. The Navy's already approved the NOAA's plan for docking 4 of their ships. So, and we're going to get more Coast Guard ships up here too. So we're talking about, you know, workforce housing, truly workforce housing, and we've got to do it. But again, that's not an issue just here. That's an issue everywhere. Let me conclude with immigration, the border. We passed we didn't pass. Our first attempt to pass the supplemental included legislation on a bipartisan basis that had been worked out by Jim Lanford of Oklahoma, who is one of the most conservative members of the Senate, but also one of the most principled members of the Senate. He's like, central casting if you're looking for a conservative, principled person. And Chris Murphy from Connecticut. And this was a really bipartisan bill. It came out, but what I think our colleagues in the Republican side, they do not want a solution, they want an issue. So immediately they started attacking James Lankford. The Oklahoma Republican Committee censored him for working on a bipartisan piece of legislation. When it came to the floor, the Republicans voted against it. A handful voted for it. So we had to strip that out and then pass the supplemental without the immigration. But we have already in the Senate developed an extraordinarily bipartisan piece of legislation. And it would have provided $20 billion in additional revenue for hiring 1,500 new Customs Border Patrol officers, 4,300 asylum officers. It would have changed the statute. It would have given, in an emergency, the ability of the president to stop, essentially, passage across the border. But again, they want an issue, not a solution. So that's where we are. Now I've depressed you enough. Let's ask some questions. I'm just joking.
questions, maybe just ask a few, and then you can think of your questions to ask the senator. We have a mic here, and maybe the first question would be on financial services. The tax bill that you just mentioned, obviously there's some Republican senators that have a problem with the child tax credit. They think that the Democrats got too much in the bill, too generous, and they also have a concern about people receiving the child tax credit who have not generated any income. And your thoughts on how we're going to move forward with your colleagues in the Senate. And you're right, in the House, 357 people voted for the bill, which is extraordinary. So.
Yeah, no, Jim, I think this is less substantive criticism because, as you mentioned, an overwhelming number of Republicans and Democrats in the House voted for it. And they have the same sort of ambiguity or, queasiness, if you will, about, some of these provisions might be too generous, et cetera. But I think what's being held up is it's just that they don't want to see it passed yet. So we're working person by person. Ron Wyden is the chairman of the committee, and we are literally going to every Republican and explain it to them what the bill does, explain it to them how it's very good for small business because it will give small business an opportunity to really enhance the research and development. And it'll be good for our economy because most of the innovation now is coming out of small businesses, but they're not able to take some of the cuts they could take previously. So that's a plus. And on the other side, again, this child tax credit it's just smart. It's not another big federal program where you got to go and fill out a form every 2 months to qualify. You just turn your taxes in. And if you're paying taxes and you're under this income level, then you can apply for the child tax credit. It's refundable. You get the money, and you're off to the races. We just have to make the case individually. But my big suspicion is this is just one where the Republican presidential campaign, they're into the situation of no wins. Don't give this guy any wins. So.
Senator Tillis, I think, filed legislation Friday on e-delivery legislation. Are you familiar?
The what legislation?
E-delivery, very important piece of legislation to Fidelity and mutual fund companies.
Oh, Senator Tillis.
Yeah.
That was filed Friday. Okay.
Wasn't it Friday?
Where was I Friday?
I think that one was have the SEC update its rules to the 21st century.
Hold on. I think.
It was just filed, so I don't think it's going to be moving very quick. I don't think it's going to be moving very quickly at all. The housing crisis, you mentioned about the $50 billion increase. There's word that the president's going to mention something. Do you know in his State of the Union this week on housing?
Oh, yeah. No,
on what he's going to propose?
He's got a package. I think it'll be along the lines that, I've been talking about, which is we generate more funds for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and for other housing programs. Also, I think it will provide incentives for states and communities that meet certain goals for affordable housing. It won't be a penalty, it'll be an incentive, and try to leverage what is being done in other states. One of the issues, I don't have to tell anyone here, is it's not just financing, it's also local zoning. And you can produce, I think, good housing without violating the spirit of the community. And that's what we should be doing. But there's a lot of resistance. Milton, Massachusetts just told Governor Healy that no. But we want to work on a basis of cooperation with the communities and incentivize the communities. East Greenwich is building affordable housing, and it can be done. It's right next to Route 4, and it's going to be a very nice, pleasant building, and it's not going to deflect from any of the other nice buildings. We can do it. It's just you've got to be aggressive about it. And I think he'll talk in those terms.
Just a question, too, on national security. There are some people that think that we, the United States, is creeping towards war in the Middle East. On January 29th, 3 of our soldiers were killed at a U.S. base in Jordan. A militia that is backed by Iran took credit for it. We responded with some 85 strikes in Iraq and Syria. Are you concerned that we are heading towards war?
Well, you also you have to be very, very careful, and you have to consider every contingency. But one of the reasons that we sent significant forces into the region immediately, particularly to carry a task force, was to prevent escalation of the war. In the days following the October 7th attack, there was some concern that in Hezbollah in Lebanon would come in with both feet. They have approximately 100,000 missiles that they could target on Israel. And that would just, everything would go up in smoke in both sides. We're also trying to put pressure on, directly and indirectly, on the Iranians. And to date, they have, well, let me put it this, they certainly haven't discouraged their proxies from attacking us, because those are the folks that hit our base in Syria. But they understand that we're there in force, and if they did anything outrageous, we could do that. So the irony here is that the intent of our disposition of forces is to prevent escalation, which would be a disaster. And I think so far to date we have. But what you've seen is the Houthis in Yemen, who are a proxy of the Iranians, but also have some of their own dynamics. Someone who was high up in our intelligence community, when asked to describe the Houthis, said they're crazy, and he wasn't kidding. But they are trying to disrupt international commerce in the Red Sea particularly, but in the Persian Gulf also. And we have banded together with a group of several nations and to protect commerce. Otherwise, our economy, you think inflation is bad now. If you can't move oil through those places, we're in really bad shape. So that's for our self-interest, but also where I think we're going to have to get more engaged with the Houthis. But I don't see anyone, in fact, I think it'd be difficult, suggesting we go in and try to take over Yemen. That's not in the cards. So we're still trying to use our advantages of air defense, sea power, and the threat of major involvement if there is Israel is attacked by anyone other than their present conflict with the Hamas. And on the other side of the equation, we're trying to make the Israeli government recognize that they have to fight this war in a humanitarian way. That's a contradiction in terms, but that's the reality. And they have to be much more cognizant of civilians. The president announced airdrops of supplies. I've been working with Angus King, who will be telling you he did this all next week. No, I'm just joking. Angus is one of our best members. We're lucky. But Angus and I have been talking to the White House about moving an American hospital ship off the coast of Gaza so we can evacuate civilians for treatment. We're also trying to talk to them about opening up seaborne routes for supplies coming in. One ship, basically, could take up as much as 500 trucks worth of supplies. They could be screened in Cyprus, etc. But what you're seeing in Israel today is it's a political fight between Bibi Netanyahu and almost everybody else. And Benny Gantz, who is the other chief or co-leader of this government, is coming to the United States. Netanyahu and he have already had an argument about him coming. it's complicated, but we have tried our best. I mean, I can tell you, I was there 7 days after the attack, and I bumped into, just coincidentally, several Marine Corps generals who were there to advise them about how to fight this war. They had been in Fallujah, in Mosul, and we did the same thing. We went after ISIS in a city. We had to protect hospitals. We had to do everything. So we have a lot of experience, and we gave them our best advice, but they haven't followed it as closely as we like. So.
How long can Ukraine survive without U.S. aid?
Ukraine will not give up. They will revert, I think, to some type of guerrilla warfare if the Russians are able to seize territory. I would think that, and again, I'm speculating, but they're going to start developing their defensive lines right now too, and they're going to do what the Russians did. They're going to dig in. They're going to get mines, etc. Their problem is ammunition, artillery ammunition, rockets too. I think I don't see them conceding. I think it could be a war of attrition on both sides, World War I redo, and that could last a year, etc., until the morale of one side collapses. And the Russians have been very astute after their blundering initial attack. They are not drafting people from areas of influence like St. Petersburg and Moscow, etc. They're going out in the hinterland and getting these poor farm boys and put them in there. They're getting convicts out of prison saying, if you survive, you're free. So they have, they're not feeling the pressure that the Ukrainians are. There's also some interesting situations when we were over there talking to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian minimum draft age is 27 years old. The average age of a Ukrainian soldier is 43. The Ukrainians, this is something they have to do. They have to lower their draft age down somewhat. In fact, ours is 18 theoretically, but bring it down so they have more troops. That's one of the other issues. They're running out of ammo. Their attrition of troops is such. And, you're 43 years old. You're not jumping up and down like an 18-year-old. So that's something we've asked them to do. They submitted, this sounds like the House of Representatives, they submitted a bill to lower the age from 27 to 25, and it immediately got 4,000 amendments. So someone's been studying the American way of government. But they have to work through this. I think they will. I think they'll come down to 25, and that'll open up another period. So, they're in it. And the reality, too, is that Putin, Putin, I don't think is ready to negotiate, and he's committed to taking Zelensky out and everybody around him, just like Navalny, just like Prigozhin, etc. He does not tolerate, and he kills people.
Questions for the senator? Joanne Sullivan, Federal Home Loan.
Shall I take the mic or shall I yell?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you should take the mic.
Take the mic. Please, take the
Take
mic.
it away from Jim. Thank you, Senator, as always, for your remarks. And I'm not going to ask a housing question this time. I would like to ask a question about NATO. Recently in the press and in some of the political campaigns, there have been comments made about whether NATO is effective, whether the United States should still be involved or not. And could you talk a little bit about what seems to me the danger of us pulling away from that, and also especially since Sweden and other countries are now coming into NATO, and how that would affect world politics?
NATO has been absolutely superb. If you would have asked me October 1st, a week before the invasion, which, by the way, the President Biden, was informing not only the Ukrainian government, but the whole world. We know they're coming. And I was a little nervous about Zelensky because I called up the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I said, has he mobilized yet? He said, no, he doesn't want to provoke him, you know. I said, anyway. And we all thought, frankly, that Zelensky would, you know, take the first train out. He said, I don't want to ride out. I want ammo. And he is a remarkably brave person. But I don't think anyone would have predicted that within hours, literally, that NATO would come together, Germany particularly, as well as France, and particularly the countries close, Poland and the Baltics, and say, we are with you. This is not an Article 5, but we are going to support dramatically the Ukrainian forces. And we started moving equipment. Most of the most sophisticated equipment was not ours initially, but NATO's. The British sent over very sophisticated long-range missiles. We started moving equipment through Romania and Poland. I was down in Romania. Actually, Bucharest is not a nice place, so you can go to Bucharest. But no, they are going ahead and converting one of their airfields into a NATO airfield. They are really in this fight because they know they could be next. So NATO is actually a key, and the fear is that that Trump has always disparaged NATO, both the leaders individually and the whole organization. And I don't know if he would be. I know he wouldn't be as work together with them as well as Biden. That's not in his temperament as well. The other factor you should know is we passed, I think as part of the NDAA, for the first time legislation that would require a vote of Congress to leave NATO. So that was a little prophylactic. But there are so many things you can do as president to undermine NATO. You just don't ship troops there. Don't do this, don't do that. That if he's of a mind to take apart NATO, he can. And I think he probably will. He has much more of a affinity, I think, with Putin than he does with a lot of the NATO leaders. But that's, one of the things that allowed Ukraine to succeed initially and keeps them in the fight, the remarkable cohesion of NATO. Again, I would have said, there's no way that there's no way that Great Britain's going to give up some. No, come on. They'll talk a lot about this. The other thing that we should realize is we are contributing a great deal of money. We are on the list based on percent of GDP. We're down about number 7 or 9. The Baltic states are giving huge amounts of money. One thing they're doing, which costs money, is they're absorbing Ukrainians who are fleeing. Poland, I think, has taken over 1 million Ukrainians. They're paying for them, et cetera. They're providing money for the government of Ukraine to operate. So when we're saying, we're giving all this money away, as a percentage of our GDP, as I said, we're about 7th or 9th.
Do you think Ukraine will ever get the votes to be accepted into NATO?
I think there's a long process there. I think they would have to first really stabilize, stop the war, basically. But maybe a long-term ceasefire, because I don't see a peace agreement with everybody, signing about what the future's going to look like. A long-term ceasefire. I think their first venture will be in the EU. Because that's less provocative of the Russians. I think their membership in NATO is a no pun intended, red flag for the Russians. So I think the EU would be the first one. But what we would have to do if there was a ceasefire that could hold, we would have bilateral arrangements, every major country in NATO with Ukraine, to provide them training, equipment, etc. The only thing we wouldn't have on the ground is NATO troops. But we're bringing Ukrainians to Grafenwehr in Germany to train them. I watched the training. we're working with them everywhere we can. The British are even more aggressive. They're training and they're advising.
North Korea has now formed a partnership with Russia and supplying an awful lot of ammunition to them. Is that something that we ought to be carefully watching now, that relationship?
Yes, I think we have to start watching our relationship with North Korea and with Iran. Iran is supplying a significant number of drones. Russia has actually provided reciprocal support to the Iranians so they can build more drones. So they're linking up pretty closely. And the North Koreans are sending significant amounts of ammunition to the Russians. So the one factor there that's the wild card is China. So the Chinese and the Russians are not, the best of friends. They cooperate, but it's mutual convenience. I think China, when North Koreans have an alternate base of power or support, I think the Chinese will get nervous. So they might start subtly pushing back on them. One of the interesting things, we have every day, the president and a lot of other people wake up and say, okay, what do we do today to stop escalation? This battle cannot go beyond the red line. And interesting, I think China and India did us a favor, not for us, but for them. When Putin was making all that noise about using nuclear weapons initially, Chinese basically told him, you do that, and, we're not going to tell you what we're going to do, but we're going to sit there. So did the Indians. And the reason was completely Chinese self-interest. They would dread Japan and South Korea from getting nuclear weapons. It would complicate their situation dramatically. And they know if there's a nuclear attack anywhere, unless a terrorist attack, but a nation-state attack, Japan within 2 weeks would have nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia would buy them from Pakistan, and they can see this proliferation, which would harm them. So that's one factor. But, Putin is, in many, he's an egomaniac, he's paranoid, he's lots of things. So you can't count on his judgment all the time. But at least he's gotten the message from several countries can't do that.
Just bringing it back to a domestic quick question, and that is the debt. The debt seems to be generating some interest with your colleagues. Two of your colleagues have joined together on a piece of legislation to study the debt. I think it was Senator Manchin and Senator Romney. The debt is now the second largest expenditure in the budget. It's now exceeded defense. I think it's like $890 billion now. Your thoughts on what can be done going forward in addressing the debt?
Well, we balanced the budget in the last year of the Clinton administration, and when he left office, there was a projected surplus of $7 trillion over 10 years. You can do it, but it takes both sides of the ledger. It takes both revenue and expenses. And that's what we did back in the 90s. I can remember running for my first campaign for the Senate because we had just passed the legislation, and there was this commercial saying, Jack Reed, that one vote that passed the tax bill increase. And I'm a little nervous. Some gentleman came in to visit me, and he sat down, and we were talking, a businessman, and he said, I was hearing that commercial, and I, frankly, I was a little upset. And then I was down in Stamford, Connecticut. I was on the road, and I was shaving, and I heard the TV. One vote, that one vote, cast by Bob Torricelli. And so he said, I'm voting for you, buddy. I think, if they're doing that to you, something. But no, it was a tough vote. And we're going to have to take those tough votes again. Because there's no way you can do this just arithmetically by, we're going to cut spending. And that's what the Republicans are trying to do now with the sequestration. They'll cut domestic spending, not military spending, domestic spending. And by the way, we need to really reinvest significantly in our military forces. Our defense industrial base is not as strong as it should be. We have new weapon systems that are coming on. We're in the process of rebuilding the Triad. The Triad is our strategic nuclear deterrence, ground-based systems, bombers, and submarines, which is the best part of it. Yes. Well, now let me give you a not so optimistic progress report. Sentinel, which is the ground-based system, has just gone through a non-McCurdy breach. It's way, way over budget, and we have to figure out how to do that. This is probably one of the biggest construction programs we've ever done, certainly DOD. Literally, we have to rebuild all the missile silos that were built in the 50s because they're 75 years old. We're developing a missile which is proceeding well, but without the silos, we can't use them. The submarines, which I love dearly, we order 2 attack submarines a year. Electric Boat and Huntington Ingalls can produce 1.2 a year. In addition to replacing our vessels, we've told the Australians we're going to give them 6 vessels. So the demand is going up while productivity or production levels are not there. Columbia, we're building that first ship. It's going to replace our ballistic missile systems, which we really do have to replace. They're wearing out. It's slipping in terms of timing. And so and this is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that we cannot avoid. So we have costs on our side. And then if you look at the domestic side, well, I'll take it from a perspective, another military perspective. 2 of the major reasons we can't meet our recruiting goals is that we have people that want to serve, but 1, they're obese, or 2, they can't pass a very straightforward test. So what the Army's done is they said, okay, we're going to pre-enlist you. I mean, you're subject to UCMJ, et cetera. Send you down to Fort Jackson. If you're obese, we're going to put you to workouts, eating, teach you how to eat right, et cetera, get you down so you can pass the physical you're in. If you have problems with the test, we're going to, as they do in the Army, we're going to teach you the test. But we're going to teach you so well, you probably won't just barely pass it. You'll probably be up and far further up. That's a nice solution. But if you think back, well, what's the fundamental problem here? Healthcare, education. So if we stop spending on healthcare and we stop spending on education, it'll catch up with the military faster than you think. So we can't, there's nothing that, you can't approach this like saying, give everything that DOD wants, and these guys don't need it, just give them a little bit. We're all integrated in the country.
Well, with that upbeat assessment on what's going on, I want to thank the Senator, but I don't know if anyone's ever watched the Armed Services Committee when our guest speaker is presiding. When he speaks, both sides are in attention. They listen to every single word that he says, and especially his questions to the military. And there are very few senators that have that kind of respect on the other side. And it's because of his knowledge, his experience, and his background. But it's something to really watch. You know, when you see the Congress is so divided, when he presides and he's asking a question, the other side is listening intently because he's a straight shooter. He's just right down the middle. But it's remarkable to see, but it's also, for anyone that lives here, he's truly a keeper, a gem, a tremendous asset, not only to this state and New England, but to our nation. So, well done, Senator. You got a lot on your plate, but we thank you for always being available to us.
Thanks, Jim.